it was a nice picture. Just appreciating all those pillars that are there, right? And I asked myself the question in Father's Day. Now, for the record, when you walked in, there was communion cups there. That was for you to pick one up. If you forgot to grab it, feel free to grab it at some point in time. Don't all get up at once, but because at some point we will be doing communion, and so they're out there. Anyways, I asked the question, about myself and about like men, right? Because we feel like we're pillars. We hold things up, right? And so I asked the question, does man make a good pillar, right? And I was a bit of a construction worker during a time. God allowed me to be part of that. I guess he was teaching me a lot of things. And so I guess to begin to dig down into what this means, you have to understand like what a pillar does, what it is. To ask the question then is, does man make a good pillar? And so I put the definition up there. A pillar is a vertical support member and may be constructed as a single piece of timber, concrete, or steel, or built up out of bricks, blocks, and so on. A pillar may have a load-bearing or stabilizing function, but it may also stand alone as an ornamental element, such as commemorative pillar or something to maintain symmetry. So a pillar holds weight. It was really cool. So I did a year of forming and a year of steel, a year of framing, and then something like 11 years of trim carpentry. That ended up being my specialty. But when I did forming, there was a lot that was involved in that. So we did commercial buildings, and so our job was to create like the foundation of what they would then build. We created the foundation, the footings, and some of the walls that would hold weight. And it was a heck of a process. I quickly learned that it's not something I wanted to do with my life, just because generally speaking, they wanted, so like first thing in the morning, you would tear down what you had formed the day before, clean it up, and then go as quickly as you can to get ready for the next pour. Because you wanted to be able to pour concrete close to the end of the day, so that way it had all night to dry, and you guys could continue the work the next day. And so sometimes when work was delayed for whatever reason, then that just meant you had a much longer day because they were going to pour no matter what. And then on occasion, and these were bad days, if the form that you had created wasn't braced properly or built properly, it would crack and break and all the concrete would pour out. And then you would be there with a shovel because you can't just let concrete pour all over the place, destroying what you had constructed. So you'd have to find a way to patch it up and then shovel all that concrete back inside. And it was a very stressful thing. There was lots of teams to be on, but all of them, because of the stress, you just ended up being yelled at. So then I got smart and I moved on from forming to rebar and steel. Steel was so much better because it was a two-man crew. You were always ahead of the people doing the forming so that they couldn't yell at you. In fact, you could heckle them. Come on, guys, what's taking you? It was great. You can do it at your own time. But what I learned from all that was that, so when they pour the concrete inside, where they pour the concrete, is an immense amount of steel that holds everything together. And so like I said, we created footings, and the thickness of the footings would be according to how soft the earth was, okay? Because if it's like super, super soft, you would need something much bigger because it's going to be holding a lot of weight. And if it was like clay, it could be a little bit thinner. But I would tie all the steel. I took pictures. Check that out. There you go. So that's on the right-hand side, my right. Yeah, I guess everyone's right, if you're looking at the picture. On the right-hand side, you can kind of see a wall that's there. So that had probably been poured already. There's some steel sticking out of it. But then you get to see the mat on the floor, so that'll be a foundation. This is most likely going to be either like an underground parking or something that's going to be holding an immense amount of weight, so like a condo or something, because there are lots of pillars. And I know the pillars are just tied up steel right now, but their job after this would be to pour the concrete at the very bottom, so the bottom 10 inches or so, to create the ground. And then the carpenters would begin to frame around each of those pillars to pour the pillars. Okay? And then they would create another mat. So you'd create a like false ceiling, if you will, because the next concrete will be poured on top of that. Okay? As you go level by level in high-rise like buildings. And so that is what I would create. pillars holding the weight of everything above you. You can imagine just how important that is. If you had no pillars, all your buildings would collapse, fall down at a certain breaking point. Okay, so pillars, immensely important. Their job is to carry the weight, but here's the important part, okay? Even though they carry all the weight, their job is to transfer the weight that is above them to the foundation underneath them. Okay, so I asked the question again, does man make a good pillar? Right? Think of all that load bearing that they need to carry. Okay, and so the rest of today's sermon is going to take a just look at man's role and what that looks like. Hey, look, I wrote it twice. So the very beginning of me looking for what is man's role in this world takes me to Genesis chapter 2, verse 15. And it says, "The Lord God placed the man in the Garden of Eden to tend and watch over it." So being a good Bible college student, I hover my mouse over my program and say, what does to tend mean in Hebrew? And what does to watch over mean in Hebrew? Okay, and instead of, so they taught me that I had these two big, strong concordances, things that like told you words in Greek and Hebrew. Now I just get to do it all on computer. It makes my life much easier. But I got to dig into those two words and what it is that they meant, which is important because God placed the man to do something, right? So I'm like, ooh, why was I created? Here it is, to tend and to watch over. So what exactly does that mean? Now on that note, this is the best garden ever. I dream of things that I have not seen just because I really wonder about them. So I wonder what that garden looked like, right? The hummingbirds, bees, and anything else that was in there, the fragrances, the colors, because I imagine there hasn't been a garden much like it since that time on this earth. And I'm just in awe that we got to, at that point in time, to take care of all that. And there was a beauty to it and a joy to it. It was beautiful. Okay, so I should get you guys to pronounce these things. Avad. That's not so hard. You want to say it with me? Avad. There, see, check that out. It means to serve. Okay, so this is the to tend word. Okay, to serve, to worship. And I love that the root word of avad is to worship because it means about doing something. So you're tending, but you're doing it in love. And when you're doing it in love for your master, okay, so ironically, it did use the word slave in there, but automatically we as human beings, because we have just totally ruined things, have a negative connotation to the word slave because we just think of abuse of power. We think of, our bad history of what that looked like. But when it talks about slave, it means like voluntarily. You are serving and doing this for the person that you love. That's why it's also closely tied to that worship idea. Okay? And so it's an opportunity to show love. It's great. To tend the garden that God had made us was an opportunity to show love and worship the Lord who had created you and the garden. Okay? I don't know how else to say. Now, it also means to work. To tend also means there's going to be physical labor involved. But we know, because afterwards it says that it's going to be a heck of a lot harder. But at this point in time, it really was a joy. It wasn't strenuous. It wasn't like, just sweating and thorns and thistles. That was afterwards. Here is like this joyous, beautiful opportunity to love the Lord your God and do what he made you to do. The second word is Shamar. Ooh, I told you to get you guys to do this one. You ready? Shamar. One more time. Shamar. Great. You got to really kind of roll and stick your tongue on that R at the end. I see I could put lots of R's. And it means to preserve, to observe and preserve. So it's really cool. Part of tending the garden was watching it grow. Like just being there, guarding it was also like a big part of it. To protect, to guard, to watch over, and to preserve is that second word. Okay, so we have serving it, working it as an opportunity to love God, and then we have guarding it and protecting it and watching it. Now the cool thing is, since we were made in God's image, God does both those things with humanity. Just let that sink in for a moment. We wanted to imitate God in that way, right? We wanted to serve, to love, and God wanted to protect and watch over and take care of us and help us to grow and guard and So it was kind of like who he was, and then that's instilled in all of us, right? And it's a beautiful thing, okay? So, awesome. Very noble job. That's the way I look at it. I'm like, God put us in charge to watch over, to protect, to serve, to tend. And it's like, this is my job. What an honorable position that God put me over here to guard this and protect this, and an opportunity to show love. And it was awesome. And then God did a silly thing, a wonderful thing. Anne giggled at me. She made fun of me this morning because I made her read my sermon notes. And I said, and then God made woman. Right? And I wrote down in my notes, I didn't put it up there. I'm like, to distract us. I'm pretty sure to distract us. I mean, the most beautiful woman on the planet. Right? I don't know if you've ever walked into, high school room and halfway through the year and just look at the boys and they're all just like, ah, as they're charmed by someone in their classroom, right? That's what happened. And so it is actually a natural thing that man, who had been created for the job of protecting and serving and tending and guarding, and to take what he had been built to do there and now transfer that to woman. He's really excited. I actually didn't put it on there, but he's like, finally, flesh of my flesh and bone of my bone. I will call her woman because she came out of man, right? And it's poetic and it's beautiful. But he takes what he was created to do and now transfers it to wife, to protect, to serve, to love, to tend, to help, to grow, to all those things, because that's what he was naturally doing already over the garden. Now his wife is like a part of that. And it's a beauty that they both get to do together in tending the garden after that, okay? And so, well, it was a beautiful thing, okay? But it also leads to the idea that man was in charge of the spiritual guidance, the relationship with God, with his wife as well. So there's some things that I learned as I was studying and reading this, is that when God gives the warning not to eat of the fruit, it very specifically says, and God said to the man. And then you read after that, and then after that it says, and then he created woman. So the initial warning was said to man. Also, I noticed that when God comes looking in the garden, he says, Adam, where are you? Right? He talks to the man. He doesn't ask Eve, where are you? Right? Because it was the man's job. He was responsible for. Okay? And it was really cool because when I read 1 Corinthians 11:3 there, but there is one thing I want you to know. The head of every man is Christ. The head of every woman is man. And the head of Christ is God. And then there's this cool little asterisks thing at the end of that sentence. And then you can look down, like sometimes there's a little letter or something on there, and you can look down at the very bottom. And it actually also uses the word responsible. So I thought that was so cool, because then you're trying to get like the meaning, the deep essence of what that is, right? And so it's like you are responsible for, woman, responsible to God, right? As it talks about the head of every man is Christ. That's who we're responsible to, right? And then we are responsible for woman as well. And so there was a beauty in that. There was just, I don't know, like I said, I learned this stuff this week. So I was just encouraged by it, right? So again, part of who man is to take care of, to tend, to help to grow, to protect, to guard, to love, to lead in. Genesis 3, to the man he said, so this is where things get a little bit harder, right? Since you listened to your wife and you ate from the tree whose fruit I commanded you not to eat, the ground is cursed because of you. All your life, you will struggle to scratch a living from it. It will grow thorns and thistles for you, though you will eat of its grains. So I imagine before this, I know it says thorns and thistles, but I don't imagine the garden originally had thorns and thistles. I don't think God's garden would have included those things. But now that we messed our relationship up with God, and now that the ground was cursed because of us, it would turn into hard work, right? It would be by the sweat of our brow. And even from our hard work, the stuff we would produce would be not that great. Even though it would make food for you, it would It would be a difficult thing. Why? Because, well, we kicked God out of the equation at that point in time. By rebelling against God, we separated ourselves from Him. Now everything was going to be a lot more difficult. Instead of a joyous opportunity to show love, it's a reminder of how we went against God. By the sweat of your brow will you have food to eat until you return to the ground from which you were made. For you were made from dust, and to dust you will return. So again, without God, things got ugly, and it's sad, and it's heartbreaking. Provision, all of a sudden now, was going to be a much harder thing that we would go through. So a lot of what I'm trying to paint for you is, again, the idea of man as a pillar and the burden that man takes on. Okay? Because I'm like, wow, it was a joy at first when we had God on our side, right? It was a beauty. It was wonderful. It was, and then we kicked God out of that equation and things got ugly. Things became a lot more difficult. And so man would have to struggle. Man would have to sweat by his brow and struggle with the thorns and thistles and weeds and so forth and so on that are growing. And it's just like, oh, why is this so difficult, right? It became much harder. Okay, good. Just keep that. Keep that in the back of your mind, because it just seems to get harder and harder and harder. Okay? So because of disobedience, the burden, the weight load increased significantly. Okay? Now, on that note, I wanted to paint the picture that women still put us to shame. Because I think of myself, so when I was thinking of my construction days and they're asking me to carry like bags of concrete from one side of the yard to the other, you're kind of like, why am I doing this with my life? You know, as you go and carry it to the other side. And yet I come home and my wife has got this gigantic thing in her belly, okay? And she's doing the wobble. And her tootsies have grown to the size of like footballs. And yet she's still trying to do things. And she does that all day long, carrying this thing. And I'm just like, what? And does it without complaining. And still tries to do other things. And there I am, moaning and groaning from the little concrete bag that I had to carry, right? So they were put there to put me to shame. It's just like, how can I complain? My poor wife has to do that. And like the amount of strength that takes, I look at God and be like, God, why couldn't we just lay an egg? That would have been so much easier. You know, just put a heat lamp on there and just wait patiently for it. No, poor woman has to carry this thing for months on end, watching her body change and struggling with the changes, and then finally has to have the courage and strength to push this out. It's insane, okay? And yet they do it. And during that point in time, right, so there's a physiological thing here. Guys don't have to do that, right? Remember, men's original thing was to provide, to protect, to guard, to watch over, to worship, to love, to tend to. And he transferred that over to wife. Right? So I put down, I thought it was cute, funny. Man's job better increase at this point. To protector, provider, foot massager, craving hunter, blanket fetcher, and anything else that she asks. Darn right. She's doing 10 times the work you're doing. You better come home from work and be ready to serve. I'm just saying. Okay? So again, I take a look at the idea of what is man's role. Right? Since he is the protector of his home, the provider of his home, he is the pillar, the things that is holding the weight, keeping things together from collapsing. Right? And you come home and poor wife is going through all those things, you better take care of her. So your load-bearing wall will increase during this season. But that's the way God designed it. And I just really wanted to highlight that. I wasn't saying that woman is not strong in any way or cannot be a provider or any of those things, because like I said, women put us to shame. Okay? Incredible, incredible people. So I move on to 1 Timothy chapter 3. And this is a chapter about a leader and what a leader should be, like a church leader. Okay? Except that when I read that, and I'm like, well, when hunting for a church leader, you want someone who portrays the best of qualities. But why should that be exclusive to just a church leader? I know that that's what you're hunting for and looking for, that's what you want. But I somehow feel like that is the definition of what we should all strive to be, whether we're in leadership or not. So when you read it, it's just like, oh boy, this is some intense stuff. This is a trustworthy saying. If someone aspires to be a church leader, he desires an honorable position. So a church leader must be a man whose life is above reproach. He must be faithful to his wife. He must exercise self-control, live wisely, have a good reputation. He must enjoy having guests in his home, and he must be able to teach. He must not be a heavy drinker or violent. He must be gentle, not quarrelsome, and not love money. He must manage his own family well, having children who respect and obey him. Whew. So I read that, and I'm like, I understand that that's what you look for in a church leader, but I feel like that's something that as men we should all aspire to. When you read it, it all sounds really good stuff, and I want to be the best person that I can be, who God created me to be, right? Living like an honorable life, a life that is above reproach, who is faithful. That faithfulness is like an everyday love and devotion, right? Who exercises self-control, doesn't let, temper get the best of him. Exercises self-control, who lives wisely, makes good decisions with his life, who has a good reputation, because that means you're doing things for other people as well, not just for yourself. You don't get a good reputation just by doing things all by yourself for yourself. You do it by serving the people around you. Enjoy being able to teach. Enjoy having guests in the home. Like, wow. So again, guys, do you guys feel that weight increasing? You're like, hold on, Luigi. So I was created to provide, to protect, to tend to help to grow what God has placed before me. Then I'm supposed to transfer all that to my wife. Yes, you are. Okay? And to serve and love and protect whatever she needs. Okay? Then I'm supposed to be a good dad. Okay, and have children who obey and respect me. I'm also supposed to have company over all the time. I'm also supposed to enjoy teaching. My goodness, this list goes on and on and on and on. 1 Timothy 5, verse 8. But those who won't care for their relatives, especially those in their own household, have denied the true faith. Such people are worse than unbelievers. Well, gotta love your in-laws. Talks about your relatives, right? And that you should be taking care of them. That's a big part of it. And especially the ones who live in your home. Or their home. You're living in their home, however you want to put that. But you're honoring, respecting, taking care of, and loving them as well. So it doesn't extend to just your family, like your immediate family, your spouse and your children, right? But all the people that you're related to, you're in charge of them too. You're in charge of providing and protecting and caring for and tending to them. Wow. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. You guys feeling the weight? Ephesians 5:25. Let's dig into what husbands do for their wives. For husbands, this means love your wives. So Ephesians 5:25. This means love your wives, just as Christ loved the church. He gave up his life for her. That's like the first definition right there. Okay, he gives you the order and then an example immediately after. Doesn't wait like way later on in the paragraph. For husbands, this means love your wife just as Christ loved the church. How are you supposed to love your wife? And here's the example. Okay, he gave up his life for her. He gives you the order. You need to love her just as Christ has loved the church. And what did Christ do? He gave up his life for her. Wow. Right there, example given. So if it's unclear, it's giving up of yourself every single day for the people that you love, for your home, your household. And that doesn't just like extend to serve, which it does, but it also has like deep meaning in leading your family into close relationship to God, into having, like family and friends around that you support and love, teaching them how to be generous, how to care for other people, not just in your own little circle, okay? Giving up your life is a pretty big thing. It's an everyday thing, not a one momentous occasion thing. It's an everyday thing. 26, to make her holy and clean, washed by the cleansing of God's word. Ooh, sounds like, again, an order to me. God made the church holy and clean. We are to make our spouse holy and clean, holy. Again, we're leading spiritually as well. Washed by the cleansing of God's word. He did this to present her to himself as a glorious church without a spot or wrinkle or any other blemish. Instead, she will be holy and without fault. In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as they love their own bodies. For a man who loves his wife actually shows love for himself. No one hates his own body, but feeds and cares for it, just as Christ cares for the church. And so when it talks about that, like feeds and cares for it, the nourishment that you provide, again, is not just physical. It's not just earthly provision, but spiritual as well. There's something beautiful that happens, and I'm not saying in a household where a man is unsaved that a woman can't step up and lead spiritually, okay? But there's a beauty when man says, okay, family, let's do this. Let's do this together. Let's chase after God together. We are one who go after God. There's something just incredible that happens when you do that, okay? And again, the giving up of your life is an everyday thing, not a one moment, okay? 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 7. Husbands, in the same way, you husbands must give honor to your wives. Treat your wife with understanding as you live together. She may be weaker than you are, but she is your equal partner in God's gift of new life. Treat her as you should, so your prayers will not be hindered. I love that condition at the end. I love that condition at the end. Treat her as you should, so your prayers will not be hindered. If you don't have good relationship with your family, with your spouse, it talks about your relationship with God being on rocky ground, right? It starts with your family. So again, boys, men, you feel, when I'm like, do men make good pillars? You're like, oh man, Luigi, what did we roof the home with? Like 10 layers of steel beams? My pillar, it's holding up so much weight. Okay? So the burden can be very real. Can I be real for a moment? So past couple weeks, if you had asked me honestly, Luigi, how are you doing? And it's not just, hey, how you doing? I'm good. Oh, how are you? Good. Yay. But an actual, you care for Luigi and you say, Luigi, how you doing? I would have answered you with, I feel like I'm a pillar and I'm trying the best that I can to hold everything together, and I'm cracking and I'm fracturing. I don't think I'm doing so good, okay? Because my wife went through an accident, and so she wants to be able to do things. And the fact that she physically can't is heartbreaking for her, and then I take that on because I see her hurting and suffering. And I take that on, and I want to be doing all the role that I'm supposed to be doing as a pastor, as a dad, as a husband, but then I also need to be filling in the gaps that have been left behind there. So anything else, and I've learned a lot more of Megan's role just from, there's the cooking and cleaning and waking up with the kids, and as well as everything else, I just felt this massive burden, and there were definitely points in time where I felt like I was cracking, where I was fracturing, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, how do pillars do this? How do they hold so much weight? Okay? But remember at the beginning of the sermon I told you the true job of the pillar is not to hold all the weight. It's not to carry everything on your shoulders. The true job of a pillar is to transfer the weight that is above to the foundation. Please understand that foundation is God. The only reason why man wants to step up as pillars because God is our pillar. Okay? But it is man's job. You want to be a good pillar? You transfer the weight that you have onto God. You're not the one who's in charge of holding up and carrying and doing all that on your own. Because if you do it on your own, if underneath that pillar was nothing but a very small footing and there was no foundation, you would crack, buckle, and break. Seriously, my entire sermon was just building up to that point right there. So if you're taking any notes at all, I only have one point. Okay? Pillars aren't meant to carry all the weight. They're meant to transfer the weight to God, to the foundation. Okay? You can't do it on your own. Can I get an amen somewhere? Thank you. Men, you're not going to be able to hold all that on your own. You are not meant to. God is the one who holds you up. He's the one who created you to do, but in image of himself, so that you rely on him. The pillar needs to rely on the foundation to hold him up. Again, otherwise you will fracture, you will crack, you will buckle, you will break. As much as we were meant to serve, protect, to guard, to love, to nourish, to provide, to watch grow and help to grow. all that has to be done in us first by God. It's the only way you're going to pull it off. Okay, so here's a cool thing. This is the way I'm closing. Love you, boo. When my wife and I were dating, there was a conversation that we had that just in my heart, I knew that I would be marrying her. It was when we talked about like what we wanted to do with our lives, what we, our dreams and aspirations. And since I was a little kid, when I was first told the story of Christ, I wanted to grow up to save the world. I was like, wow, what a way to go, to die to save the world. When I grow up, I want to be just like Jesus. As a very innocent little boy, that's what I wanted. I understand that God paid it once and for all, and I don't need to. But I saw what Christ had done, and it meant so much to me. I wanted to be just like him. Like when I grow up, I want to give up my life for other people. And so as I was discussing that with my wife took a serious moment and looked at me and said, well, hold on a second. If you want to save the world, well, who's going to save you? I pondered for a moment, and then she looked at me with a big smile on her face, and she says, I guess I meant to save the one who wants to save the world. It's in that moment that I knew that I'd be marrying her. Okay, and let me tell you that in life, that when things get rocky, when things get shaky, when I feel myself falling, when I feel myself slipping, my wife points to God. Just, Luigi, remember who God made you to be. Remember the essence of who you are deep down inside, who God made you to be. And she points to the foundation. She points to God. She reminds me, and it carries me forward. It lets me move on. What a beautiful relationship. I hope you can all enjoy that one day, or if are enjoying that. Okay? So again, man is not meant to hold all the weight on his own. God is your foundation. Transfer the weight. I should have probably put the one where it talks about cast your burdens unto me, carry my burden that is light, right? When Jesus is talking about it, that's what we should be doing. It was great. My sister put up this little meme. It shows this Ford 150. So it's a big truck, and it must have had like 300 sacks of cement on it. And what I mean is that it was like 15 feet high, and they had strapping around it, and the truck was so low to the ground from all that weight. And the little meme was simply saying, God saying, cast your burdens onto me. This truck, and it could barely move, but it was meant to carry all. And I was just like, yep, there it is. Not meant to do that. Not meant to carry all that. Meant to transfer it on to God. Take a moment and ponder that. And then if you want to get your communion cups ready, oh great, look, I told you guys to get it. I don't have one. Jonah, can you go get me a communion cup? Thank you. Ramia's like, here, Jonah, you can give this one. Jonah's like, it's okay. I'll give one for you. So happy Father's Day, you men who pour out your hearts, who serve and protect, who serve your wives, who maybe might be feeling at that point where you're breaking, you're fracturing. Can I just remind you to transfer that to God? Not to hold on to it. It's good to imitate God, but He does it all. I lost my boy. Jonah, can I get one? A man willing to serve. If anyone else needs one, wave Jonah down. He's got you covered.